another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. And now, your hosts, widely known as the Marvelous Duo, it's Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
And I'm Michael Lyons.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Margaret.
We're widely known.
Commonly known.
Commonly known. It's very disquieting. I feel dismayed.
Why are you dismayed?
It's like a segue of some kind.
I see.
Well, I'm dismayed, but I'm actually not dismayed at all. I'm always sort of upbeat. And I, as you well know, we kind of roll with the punches, and that comes from having been punched a lot.
Yeah, if you've been pummeled repeatedly, you learn how to handle.
How to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that in our world today, there's a lot of people who aren't handling it well, and there's a lot of stress out there right now.
Yeah.
Now, it's easy to say that because everyone thinks that the current, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The old Dickens quote from Tale of Two Cities is everyone always thinks it's the worst of times or the best of times. It's all in some ways what Dickens was saying is it's all sort of relative.
Mm-hmm.
But and you could look back at the experience of earlier generations and say, well, they had it tough, or there isn't a giant world war going on, for argument's sake. But there is, at least from compared to, let's say, the last couple of decades, we're ramping up to what appears to be some sort of an inflection point. Societally, our world, there's a lot of tension in the world right now. There's a tremendous amount of conflict. And, you can see it writ large in the headlines and so on, or on the internet. But you can, that's always kind of there. There's always this kind of low level, everything is doom and gloom. Everything's going to happen. Everything's bad, bad, bad. But I think now you're seeing it, you're seeing it in day-to-day, daily interactions where people are just a little bit on edge, and it's not just it's not just a single a singular observation. My voice is really gone today. A singular observation. You're seeing it over an extended period of time where people are really nuts out on the road. They're cutting each other off. They're impulsive. They're swerving from back, side to side. Early. I drive early in the morning. Early in the morning, they're probably not drunk, but they're just so involved or so distracted. You also see it in the stores, in the supermarket. Where people are just going down the aisles of your average big box store, and almost in a zombie fog zone. Really almost aimlessly, but yet their faces show a lot of tension, a lot of suppressed grief or suppressed anger, or sometimes not so suppressed anger. And then you do see, mostly on the internet, but you can see it even in real life, if you will, where there's a tremendous amount of conflict. Small things will cause people to just lose it. And, it escalates very rapidly into either violence or vicious words going back and forth. You can see it online, but you can see it actually in day-to-day interactions. And it doesn't seem to have an appropriate trigger. Sometimes people can fight, but these fights seem to break out over next to nothing. And so you say to yourself, there's energy there. There's a tremendous amount of suppressed energy. There's a lot of tension. When you wind people up, what you're basically doing is seeing that they're storing a lot of emotional charge, a lot of emotional energy, a lot of tension is within their psyche and then also in their bodies, and then it releases. it's triggered, and you get these outsized, seemingly uncalled for responses, and it's a symptom. It's not that that's the problem with the world, but that's the symptom. That's what people are when you put people under pressure and you don't give them an appropriate outlet. There's no way to get rid of this, it seems, or there's sort of this veneer of everything's okay, but I don't feel like it's okay. And so it becomes a dissonance, right? There's a cognitive dissonance there, and there's a tension even in that. And then you have these flares or outbreaks or static discharges. It's showing you that there's a great deal of tension in the world today.
Well, the people in general, what you're seeing is when something is happening, especially if they don't really understand what's happening, questions come up, and then they're wondering, should I be worried about this? And they stuff the reactions inside. They don't let them out because it's too much in the unknown. They're thinking, well, maybe I might be overreacting or overthinking, but eventually that begins to pile on, and it's just continually stuffing the bag until it can't contain all that turmoil that they're feeling. Because when you don't resolve an issue, it's still there, spinning, and it's not a smooth spin. It's like this broken spin, a wheel that's not completely round. It's coming round and hitting a bump.
It's out of true. It's literally wobbling,
bumping along as they go, and then you keep adding to that, either making more dents in the wheel or adding more wheels with bumps in it. No matter what you're doing, you're getting shaken up,
or spinning it faster. Putting more energy into an unstable situation makes it more unstable.
And most people are looking at this going, now, what do I do? Because the habit form is just I'll sit on that, push it aside. I still have other things to do. But what we're seeing right now is people are hitting that point where they can't push it aside anymore. It's too much. There's too much agitation going on, too much bumping, too much out of true. And humans in general, we need to be able to come to a point of quiet or peace so that we can come back to a balance point. But right now, it just seems like things are coming at you from all sides. So what is the reaction that you give when all that is happening? You wonder, why am I feeling this way? And I don't want to feel this way. The most obvious thing is to let loose. Just try to get rid of the excess energy. But it usually is an unconscious thing. So it gets triggered, and it usually comes out in the worst forms imaginable, because it's not conscious. It's all that has been churning on the inside in this unconscious mass.
Well, you also have, I mentioned it earlier, but there doesn't seem to be, there have been a lot of experiments done where, if you will take laboratory animals and you will frustrate them for one particular, in one particular way, the solution, or even the release of all the tension, you frustrate the animal, they release the tension, but yet the solution gets no closer. So there there seems to be no way to resolve the problem. So the unresolved issue, which no matter what you do, even if there's a release of tension in another direction, you blow up at your spouse, or you cut somebody off in traffic, or you scream and yell and carry on, but yet the uneasiness isn't resolved. It isn't, okay, if you have a conflict with somebody, if you used to say, well, okay, if you're having a problem with somebody, go talk it out, or go have a fight with them, scream and yell and carry on, and get it all on the table, solve it, or resolve it. You may hate each other at the end of the day, but you both at least got a couple of licks in, and you say, well, okay, we exchanged and negated or at least drained off that energy by having a big blow up in the fight, and then we maybe resolved to never see each other again, or we've figured out a way to resolve the conflict. And it doesn't have to get to that point. You spend a lot of time in the environment where you are with the kids, teaching them how to resolve conflicts before it gets to that point. But you can see it in 4-year-olds when they get frustrated, they tend to either first try to bury it or try to find a way to to ignore it or to deny it. And then if it gets to a certain point, they're going to have a bust out row, and stuff's going to get broken, or words are going to get exchanged. But then you can find somehow that can also resolve that whole conflict. You can intervene at that point. Well, there doesn't seem to be that mechanism. There used to be, or rather, you could see where there would be a conflict, and then there'd be a way to resolve it. You would either find some sort of a negotiation point. You would find some sort of way of having an actual fight with somebody. But all these avenues appear to be either shut down or kind of sideways to what the actual conflict is. You said it before. People don't understand what's exactly wrong. What's the source of this unease, the source of the tension? It appears to be occult or hidden in some way. Yet feel it. They feel that there's a wrongness to the current environment. So the solution to that can be multifold. But if you're an unconscious person, you're not, and this is many of us, want to try to make it so that it's one or two. It's many people are in this state where it's just they feel this unconscious tension, don't know what to do with it. Can I bury it? Can I resolve it? No, nothing. There's not even a thought process about it. It's just don't feel right. Don't understand what's causing this, and it builds. It's like a storm which has not yet released the lightning, or the rain is just hanging over you and ready to pour, but it hasn't. This is the environment we find ourselves in, and it's an environment ripe for violence. It's an environment ripe for tremendous rifts in society or in culture, and it's a little bit dangerous, in my opinion. In one regard, it's dangerous to the individual, but it's dangerous to societies in general. This is the genesis of larger and sometimes out of control conflicts, which can afflict the world.
Right. Well, just being in a state where it always, the common phrase that we all understand is we're waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
You're just waiting. You're not sure what's going to happen, but that waiting, you know something's about to happen. Maybe that's the best way to put it, but you don't know what. And most people don't thrive in that kind of environment. If you've ever been in a family and you've had one family member that the rest of the family goes walking on eggs, because this person is very reactive or prone to tantrums.
Right, to acting out or whatever.
Or acting out, yeah. and has never really learned how to manage their own emotional state. Because when mentally you're going through a problem and, you may feel frustrated, but when it's an emotion and not a thought, that's when it can get physical.
Mm.
People will escalate something to the point of rage. You can be angry, or you can be annoyed, and then you can be angry.
Mm.
And then some people go straight into rage.
Out of control, though, too.
Yeah. And that out of control aspect is something that has not been really addressed in this society.
Mm.
What you keep seeing is, oh, well, if you're feeling it, then you're supposed to feel it. And, it's perfectly all right to feel it. Okay, you can feel it, but you can't act it out on somebody else. That doesn't seem to be emphasized right now.
Mm.
You're not supposed to hurt another person just because you feel like it. It's such a strange situation that we're in, that only people who feel affronted, what's the word I'm looking for? Offended. It's perfectly all right for them to give a reaction, whatever it may be. They were offended. And you sit and you go, well, you're offending me, but that doesn't count?
Hmm. It seems asymmetrical. I wanted to go back and mention something you brought up, and I want to just reemphasize. A lot of this tension has to do with the unknown. Mm-hmm. And the unknown is always a trigger for fear. You mentioned the person in the family who you walk on eggshells. The reason you do is you have no idea when or where or what is going to trigger this person. And if you've had experience where the smallest thing, engenders or evokes a outsized and crazy town response, and you don't say there, well, no, let's explore the roots of this. No, because this person is out of control based on very little provocation. So there's an internal dialogue, there's an internal tension, there's a lot of charge there, and then it's like fulminate of mercury, or the tiniest little thing. You trigger it, and it roars out at you or at everyone around you. That pain body response, which it often is, causes everyone around you to be afraid of you. Now that's a form of power. When when the ego feels that others or that people around it are afraid of it, it likes that. It likes this idea that I'm powerful. My anger makes me powerful, or the fact that people will shy away from me and don't want to offend me or in any way get on the wrong side of me. This is all me, ego stuff. Makes the ego feel powerful, and what keeps people from interacting and walking on eggshells, as you say, is this fear of the unknown. Now you have a terrible dynamic here in the family. But when a society has that kind of dynamic, it can fracture. It can fracture along very, 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 very quickly. It can go from 0 to 60. And you can see this in failed societies or in failed associations, human associations, where all of a sudden you declare the other not only as just persona non grata, but as non-human. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this happen in cultures far too often, where the other is identified by the society as not only just a pariah, but a subhuman pariah. Someone who can be treated in such a way that their lives they don't count. You mentioned it just a moment ago. you feel like you can do anything you want to this particular person because you're in a rage. You're enraged. You're powerful. You're going to go and treat them as though they didn't matter. But yet if they protest, oh no, your protest is, I don't recognize your protest. I'm the one who's enraged here. I'm the offended one. Well, if you write that large in societies, you start to get the people who are the in group, the on the side of all that is good and holy, and then there's the outer darkness. And once you have that in a society, you don't have a society anymore. You have a mob, and you have those who act as a mob, and those who are acted upon. And you find it in pogroms and genocides, unfortunately, throughout human history. The beginnings of those things, though, are I won't say interesting, but they're good things to observe before you get to that point. And I think where we are right now, unfortunately, is a proto environment like that. You're seeing a sort of restlessness, an unease, a tension, and what that in a society, in an individual, it's bad, but in a society, it can all of a sudden galvanize, say, well, the reason everything is bad is these people over here. It happened in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, they're blaming. It's easier to blame somebody for the cause of it.
Right, and all you need is that spark. In a totalitarian society, or in a society where there's a sort of a top-down type of authority, all you need is a spark that then galvanizes this, what we were talking about here, this unease, this tension, this dismay, this distress. People don't like that. They don't like feeling this way, and they can't figure out why. And it just takes this sort of all your unease and tension and everything that's bad about the world, we're going to blame it on these people with purple dots on their heads and green shoes on their feet. Well, they're the bad ones, and they're subhuman. And if we get rid of all of them, everything will be wonderful again. And it's not true. It's never, ever been true. But that roaring tide of dismay and unease and hurt and sort of unconscious why me gets channeled. That's the danger that we're approaching here. And I think the antidote to it is something we can talk about, and I think we should, because there's a whole different movement, which is interestingly enough happening at the exact same time, which is counter to this. And we've talked about it as well, this sort of shift. And we've talked about how this shift is coming into the world. And you can see those lines, kind of those division lines lining up. There's certainly a different kind of battle going on here for what we're going to do with all this energy.
True. There is a buildup of energy. And question I have, just a thought. Why do we always cast blame somewhere else? Why? As a human being, I mean, you see it in the little ones. No, he did it or she did it.
Right.
It's not me.
Not me.
It's he or she, and it's obviously not true.
Right. And the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Generally speaking, it's somewhere in the middle.
But why do we cast blame so easily? It's almost an automatic, unconscious reaction. It wasn't me.
Well, I have an answer for that, or not. Maybe it's not the final answer, but it's not me, because that would make me wrong. It would make me have to change, and the ego hates that. It's much easier to say, oh, it's this person's, this other's fault, and that therefore I'm right, and they are wrong, and I have to do nothing, and they have to accommodate me. That's all. That's the ego litany. That's the ego in its happy place. Everyone else is wrong but me.
Oh, I'm always right.
I'm always right.
I see. I see.
And so finding someone else to blame.
In my world, I'm always right. That means everybody else is wrong.
Right.
So I get to blame everybody else for being wrong.
Oh, and they have to accommodate me.
And they must accommodate me. That's a...
clinical narcissism
Yes.
in one regard.
But I mean, you look at that and you're like, are we all born narcissistic then? Because most children do that. This is just...
There's certainly, you could look at it and say, well, people are all that way. But I think that this is something which is acquired through the development of ego. And the development of ego in that your ego wants to be right and wants to find the other to be wrong. It wants to say that I am superior, I'm better than, they're less than, and if you keep on working that seesaw back and forth, I'm right, they're wrong, I'm special, they're not. That's all about the ego, and it acquires power that way. So in the beginning, I think that you don't find that in people. In infants, certainly not. But there's a point at which the ego sort of becomes embodied. It breaks off within the persona and starts to say, it's me, 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 me. My pronouns are mine, mine, mine. So, mine.
I read a study where this was, I believe, in the Amazon, and they had encountered a tribe where their whole society was very differently based than what the Western world does. And the games that they introduced to the children, were, there were games where, you had a winner and a loser, whether it was running races or playing something similar to a board game, and whoever got their first wins and the rest lose. And they looked at this type of gaming and they went, let's play something else. And they took them to something that like a playground, similar to a playground. And they were on this seesaw, but they were taking turns on the up and down, and it was no one winning, no one losing. Just understanding that things are up or down. And it was a common theme throughout all of their particular tribe. They weren't emphasizing winning or losing because everybody felt bad. You had one group or one person win, but everybody else felt bad. Oh, you don't need to do that. Let's do something else. I thought that was fascinating.
Right. I mean, certainly ego loves competition, and maybe there's a component, a basic component of ego is I won, because you get as the person who wins, you get a lift, and the other study that they've done, many studies that they've done, is that when you have a competition where there's a winner and a loser. This was in males, so just in particular, you would see that testosterone levels in winners would go up and testosterone levels in losers would go down over time. So there's certainly a physiological effect. Certainly, people, you see all kinds of addictions where you have gaming addictions, gambling and that sort of thing. There's an endorphin, there's a truly endorphin-based pathway there. There's the high that you get from winning, and the depression, the other, I think the serotonin or whatever it is, the other chemical that comes up that you get from losing. And so the dopamine serotonin pathways that are invoked here are physiological analogs of that same sort of thing. But the psychological, the ego bit, in the tribe that you just mentioned, they would seem to be much more in a balanced mode, and maybe there's still ego there, but it's got some sort of a mitigating effect.
The focus was more on challenging yourself and bringing your skill levels up. So if you were able to spear the fish more efficiently or quickly, you had a better technique, it's like, yay. And everybody was happy because, you're helping the entire tribe at that point.
Cooperative.
But they would applaud that kind of it's not winning, okay? Because winning has been defined as winning and losing. That kind of honing of oneself. And I think that kind of focus is what's needed here. So that endorphin hit, really the endorphin hit was meant for you to feel good when you've accomplished something in competition with yourself, not necessarily with another person.
Certainly you could channel it that way and maybe get a better, because you see, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you see many athletes who are in solitary pursuits will say that I'm not competing against the others in the skill or in the sport. I'm competing against myself. And when you find the interesting thing about those types of competitions, if you will, when you're competing against yourself, is that you will find that there's presence there. The competition against oneself is a being moment more than the competition against other. The competition against the other, as you said, as a winner and a loser. And maybe we can kind of segue back, because we've kind of gone around the Cape of Good Hope, though. But
sorry.
No, it's all good. To segue back towards this, because so what we have here with this, the unease, the tension, the dismay, the distress in the world, is we have sort of the end game of a lot of unresolved conflict.
Well, here's a thought, just a thought, if you don't mind. The focus was somebody else made me feel bad.
Right.
Instead of I have to be aware of me or competing with me, and that's the only thing that I really need to be concerned with. Because I lost to that person, then it's the other person's fault.
Right.
But no, if you are in real competition, it's always with yourself to strive higher and to the next level. So that's interesting to me, because that means that the winning and losing mentality allows you to blame the loser.
Well, yeah, exactly so, because it's always the other is always involved here, and superiority, which is again one of those a lovely ego feeder. If you want to nurture the ego, nurture it through its own superior. The ego doesn't get a lot of nurturing when it's just finding itself as being in competition with itself. In that case, you're saying, well, there's no winner, there's no loser here. There's just us getting better. And it's still that phraseology betrays that there's an internal dichotomy. You're not in being state. You're talking about, me versus me, but yet it hasn't got the toxicity. Couldn't say the word. It hasn't got the toxicity of the ego becoming superior through defeating the other, or to identifying the other as your opponent, and then making sure that they are pressed down and you are risen, you're commensurately raised up. But again, I like this discussion, but I want to drag it back towards. We have a quote from Tolle that we want to kind of bring in at some point here, because what we're seeing in all this uneasiness and all of this ego play is a tremendous amount of negativity. And what totally identifies the source of this negativity, the source of this unease and tension and dismay and distress is, first of all, he talks about something called psychological time. And that's sort of a dense phrase. And we're going to get to it in the quote, but just to kind of frame that out, psychological time is ego time. Ego time is talking about when this happens, or if that happens, or when that happened in the past, and what I feel about it now, and what is going to happen in the future. Psychological time has nothing to do with the present moment. It has everything to do with every other moment besides the present moment. The ego likes to traverse the whole of its, and it's not even really the whole of the actual time that you've spent on the planet and all that you might imagine that will come to you. It's all of its story time. Psychological time is also story time. It's the stories that the ego has told itself about the other, the stories that the ego is telling us about what's going to happen, what to fear, what to manage, what to worry about, what to be stressed about, what happened in the past, and why you have to hold on to those grudges and make sure those people never hurt you again. That's all psychological time. And the thing about that is that's where the ego stores all the wound up energy. If you look at the ego as a big spring, as a big coiled spring, all that tension is in the psychological time. All the time it spends worrying about the future is winding that up. All the time it spends about regretting and remembering the past and all the hurts and things that happened back there winds that up. And then with all that wound up energy is what it can fire off into attacks or into an energetic discharge, which makes it feel powerful. But do you want to hit the quote?
Sure.
Or do you want to expound on that first? It's up to you.
Psychological time?
Yeah.
Let's read the quote.
Let's read the quote.
Mm-hmm. All negativity is caused by an accumulation of psychological time and denial of the present. Unease, anxiety, tension, stress, worry, all forms of fear are caused by too much future and not enough presence. Guilt, regret, resentment, grievances, sadness, bitterness, and all forms of non-forgiveness are caused by too much past and not enough presence. This is Tolle from his book, The Power of Now.
It's true. As true now as it was when he wrote it. Societally right now we're living in these two forms, but you can bring it all the way back down to the person, to the individual. The individual, the one that we were talking about before specifically, that everyone in the family has to walk around on eggshells because of. Because of what? Because they're living in a fantasy world, a psychological, time-filled world.
Right. Where what exists for them can be states of unease, anxiety, lots of tension and stress, and a state of worry. In other words, they are run by fear, and they're not aware of it. They feel that they have every right to worry because that's the way we show affection. I have to worry about you. And what it does, see, that's the interesting thing. The awareness isn't there to see what the result of being in that state is on the rest of the members of the family that have to be interacting with this person who is constantly anxious or worried, or constantly stressed. But the results, usually there's guilt and regret, and forms resentments, sadness, bitterness. And the key, I think, is the unforgiveness. Because if you cannot let go of those grievances or any offense, then you're holding it close to your chest, and you curtail your life force at that point. You're not living. You're living in your head.
Yeah.
And the emotions are eating you alive.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the worry specifically, and the phrase that you said, and this is, I'm sure people have heard this. I'm worrying about you because that's the way I show affection. I'm doing this for you. Well, I'm doing this for you, and oftentimes, the person who's doing this is blind to the deleterious effects. The infantilization. There's the word, I got it out. Infantilization of others. The inability to let them go and be independent and be, the codependent toxicology that you see, toxicity rather, that you see in family situations where one has, in essence, where the family doesn't live independently as individuals, but it's sort of this group mind. The toxicity that you see is often written off as justified. Well, I have to do this in order to keep us safe, in order to keep us together, in order to show my affection, in order to show that I care. So the ego gives ready-made justifications for all the, well, I can see this is, they're upset about it, but they don't understand that I'm doing this for them. Kind of, this is the litany you find in these psychologically fraught relationships, these codependent relationships. And then the other side of it, you just mentioned, the non-forgiveness, which is all in the past. This psychological spring is, it just won't let anything go. You've run into people. I'm sure everyone has run into people whose conversations are constantly about the past. And if you have even a few minutes of conversation with them, they're bringing up all the things that happened. If only this and if only that, and I had the opportunity to do this, and that happened, and then this one did this, and 17 years ago I could have had this, and I could have been a millionaire today, and everyone's always at, oh my God, and you're trapped. You're like, yeah. but yet in the dynamic of a family, that can be the toxic center of it. And in the dynamic of a society, when the society is living with psychological time, you have this same sort of thing writ very large. The fear, tension, stress can be, I'm doing this for you, can be the basis for an oppressive or even totalitarian type of government. And the inability to let any particular offense go and to find some way to drag every potential perceived slight forward in a family, to do that in a society is to identify with the generations yet unborn, the grievances which were perpetrated by generations, 100 generations ago, to in essence identify with a particular people or a particular subsegment of the population generational guilt. There's another word for it, which is more evocative, which is called blood libel. I mean, this is used in many ways. But generational guilt is saying you are guilty because of why? Because of what your ancestors 50 generations did ago. Well, that makes you responsible.
Blaming,
but blaming in a way that cannot be resolved. There's nothing that these people could do to undo what the past was, and they have no responsibility for it. But yet, go ahead. Sorry.
They were not the ones that had done the offense or done what was considered very evil at the time. And it's very interesting because people complain about, what that phrase in the Bible. They say, well, what mistakes that the fathers have done will follow down the family to 3 generations, 3 or 4. And they're saying that's not fair. Well, yeah, it's not fair, but that's the accusation that these people that want reparation for something that happened generations ago, this is what they're saying. And it's like, wait, you are talking to people who haven't raised a hand to you.
And this is what I mean. When you bring this into a society, you can see it in families. You can see that. Well, you're just like your Uncle Fred from 50 years ago, and you have all the same mannerisms, and this is bad enough in families. When it becomes societal, and when it becomes the ego-driven identification of other, and you can find it throughout. I mean, you can find and point specific instances all over, but every society has this tendency, and I think it waxes and wanes. And at the point we are now, I think we're right at the turning of that tide. We have to be very careful. And I mentioned it earlier. I want to bring it back again. There's another force that's kind of moving through our society, moving through our world right now, which is the presence, if you will, combating this sort of ancient human issue of living in the past with non-forgiveness and living in the future with worry and fear is a shift. There's a change. And to some extent, Tolle is a harbinger of this, and there are many, 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 many others. The antidote to what we see today is contained in his quote. Notice he very intentionally conflates the word present, which means now, and presence. And the conflation of those two, and the fact that they are so very closely related, is kind of the key. If you want to heal a society, you have to bring it out of its infatuation, its addiction to psychological time. It's addiction to worrying about the future. It's addiction to worrying about the past, or rather to regretting the past. But individual by individual, bringing people into presence, bringing yourself into, the idea of competing with yourself, not competing with the other, the idea of looking at the now and not saying, well, in 17 years I'm going to have this happen, and what happens tomorrow, and what about this and what about that? No, right now it's good. Right now it's fine, and all the past is immutable. All the past is in the past. Leave it there. You mentioned the biblical phrase, "Let the dead past bury its own dead," is exactly that. Leave what's in the past. It was an antithesis to this idea of visiting the sins of the fathers on 3 generations of their children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in general, people understand that it wasn't their hand that did this, and the culture or the family wants to put it onto the next generation. It's like the reverse of blame, if you would, or a strange adaptation of blame, where you're putting that responsibility onto the next generation. Not that they caused it, but you're saying, no, well, you're going to resolve it.
Yeah, you're going to make it right.
Instead of the people that are there right now at the helm resolving it. It's fascinating because you see that, well, no, we're going to push that into the future, or it's, well, their fault over there. They're the reason why that's happening.
Right.
Like, it's you.
But the ego doesn't want to ever take that.
Well, it is a very unhappy state to be in. And you can choose not to be in that state. You really can. But it means that you have to stop indulging in that state. And I hear the phrase, oh, I have every right to feel that way.
Yes.
Yes, you may have every right to feel that way. You may be in the right because of it. But what's happening is you're suffering because of it. Do you want to stop the suffering, or would you rather be in the right?
That's the choice.
Well, this is what I mean. You have the choice of being right, and if it matters to you more to be right, then go with it. But if you want to stop the suffering, you have to choose differently. You're going to have to choose a higher road that is looking at this going, well, this is a trap. I can't get out of it and still feel, like I'm right all the time. I may be wrong. Maybe that person's wrong. Am I going to make space for the imperfect in my life? Or am I just the perfect person? And it's all about me, because I can't be wrong. All of the rest of you are wrong. I'm always right.
And yet you're holding suffering.
Exactly. This is my point. You are miserable. Absolutely miserable. Do you want to stay there? Because the key to the door of your prison is there. Will you take it? Will you go through? What was that play in New York where there's 3 people that were trapped in this one room? And I wish I could remember the name of it. In effect, it was like, I think it was 1 male and 2 females, and one of the female was lesbian, and they were all like infighting with one another. Nobody was happy with any of it. And just when it hit the fevered pitch of everyone wanting to scream at everybody else, the door to that room opens, and they all look at each other. Like, your freedom is right through that door. Will you take it? And nobody goes through.
Right, they'd rather fight and try to be right.
And the door slowly closed, and they were left in that, the misery that they knew, as opposed to the unknown of freedom.
That's a beautiful analogy.
I wish I could remember the play. It was a play.
It'll come back to us, or all of you listening, just email Scott right now. But but in truth, that's what you just said. Is exactly, it's a beautiful portrayal of that idea. If you would rather be right or strive to be right and be miserable than forgive, for argument's sake, and let the past be gone. Yes, it happened to you, but sitting there holding it in your heart and saying, I'm right, and they were wrong, and I'll never, never, never forgive them, leaves you in misery, and sometimes in misery with people who have already shuffled off this mortal coil perhaps 50 years ago. And as an individual, it's misery, and as a society, it's even worse.
Well, the interesting part about that play was the fact that the three of them were still together there. Not one of them was alone. And I think if one had gone through the door, I think the other two might have followed, because nobody wanted to be with that other person. Right. Whoever they were.
Yet this misery trio was...
But the trio, they were only too happy to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the shift has a potential anyway to perhaps put paid to this. But one thing that is shifting right now is we're shifting to the end of our hour.
Oh, all righty.
This was an interesting and far-ranging conversation. I hope you're able to follow it, because we weren't.
All right. And on that note, I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening. We're going to figure this out.